Hey, what's going on YouTube, and welcome to another Season 7 League of Legends Champion Guide. In this one, we're going to cover AD carry Varus, the Arrow of Retribution.
The guilty will know agony.
Varus is a champion with amazing poke from his Q ability, and great peeling from both his E and his ultimate. His ultimate's very strong and gives him really solid 1v1 potential, and it can be devastating in teamfights as well, since it can CC multiple targets. He then also has multiple strong builds. If he wants to be really good in the late game, he can go for that Essence Reaver crit build, and if he wants to have a really strong mid game, he could go for the lethality penetration build. Varus, however, has no dash ability, and he's certainly not the most mobile champion out there, so he really requires good positioning. He's also a very mana-hungry champion early on, but we will be getting either a Mana-Immune or an Essence Reaver inner build to help solve this issue. Regardless, Varus is one of the best AD carries out there at the moment, and there is a reason he's played so often. For your Masteries, you'll want to go 18 Ferocity and 12 Cunning, grabbing either Warlord's Bloodlust or Deathfire Touch as your Keystone Mastery. Very simply, if you feel like you need some extra sustain, then go for that Warlords, but if you do want to increase your poke damage, then Deathfire Touch is also an amazing option. I prefer Warlord's Bloodlust myself, but it really comes down to personal preference. As usual, for the rest of your Masteries, focus on increasing your sustain just a little bit, and of course, increasing your damage. For my runes, I like to go for attack damage reds, armor yellows, magic resist blues, and attack speed quints. This will give you a nice extra chunk of damage, and that attack speed is really nice for last hitting, and of course you get the armor and the magic resist just to be a little bit more durable in that bot lane. If you're going for a high lethality build, then of course you could go for the lethality reds as well, but I do prefer the attack damage and attack speed myself. The attack speed will put the stacks of your W on the target quicker, and of course the attack damage will increase that poke and make last hitting easier. For your summoner spells, you want to stick with the meta AD carry setup and grab Flash and Heal. Flash is easily the best summoner spell in the game, and it gives you a very good aggressive and defensive option. As Varus, you don't get any mobility from your kit really, and Flash will be able to give you an escape. You can of course also flash forward and snipe somebody from far away with your piercing arrow if you do need to use Flash to close that distance. Heal is then a really solid summoner spell as well, and it's great for baiting, sustaining, teamfighting, and an escape because it does give you bonus movement speed when you activate it as well. It's the best pick in that bottom lane because it can save both you and your lane partner. Your passive is Living Vengeance, and it can give you a nice chunk of attack speed as long as you're killing minions, monsters, or champions. Varus gains 40% plus 50% bonus attack speed for 5 seconds upon scoring champion kills or assists, reduced to 20% plus 25% bonus attack speed on minions and monsters. So this is pretty solid because when you are last hitting in that bottom lane, you're going to have increased attack speed, making last hitting even easier. In a team fight, if you can score an early kill or assist, you're going to get a big chunk of attack speed and can output a lot more damage because of it. You're kind of like a Jinx in the fact that if you can get an early kill or assist, you're going to get a big boost and be more devastating in the fight, so look to get one early on. Your Q ability is Piercing Arrow, and this is your long range poke ability that if landed can be really hard to deal with. On first cast, Varus channels up to 4 seconds, increasing Piercing Arrow's range and damage over the next 2 seconds, and Varus can also move while channeling, but cannot use basic attacks, abilities, and is slowed. On the second cast, Varus fires, dealing physical damage to all enemies in the arrow's path, reduced by 15% per enemy hit down to a minimum of 33% damage. So this is that ability we want to max first because it has a really high AD ratio and a 925 range, making it a very solid poke ability. You can use this ability in the lane phase to poke the enemy over and over again, bring him to a low health pool, and then go for an all-in. If you are losing the lane phase, you can also use this ability to farm from far away and get some easy last hits. Your W is Blighted Quiver, and it adds some nice bonus damage, and also some percentage max health damage. Passively, Varus's basic attacks deal bonus magic damage and apply Blight for 6 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. His other abilities consume Blight on the enemy upon damaging them, dealing them magic damage for each stack capped at 360 against monsters. So this is a pretty nice ability because you do get bonus damage on your auto attacks, which means last hitting is going to be just a little bit easier. Of course, this will also increase the harassment on enemy champions, but as long as you can get 3 stacks of this up and then detonate it, it can do a lot of damage. If you're against a really tanky team, then you could consider maxing this second behind your Q ability, but generally I'd leave it for last and max my E ability second instead. Your E ability is Hail of Arrows, and it does some nice AoE damage, but also slows and applies grievous wounds. When activated, Varus fires a Hail of Arrows that deals physical damage to all enemies in the target area and desecrates the ground for 4 seconds, slowing all enemies standing in it and applying grievous wounds. So this ability is fantastic because it also has a 925 range, and the cooldown goes down 2 seconds every time we put a rank in it, and of course it also has an AD ratio. All of these combined are pretty much why you want to max this ability second behind your Q. When you're going in for a trade or a team fight, land this on the enemy champion to do all of that damage, slow them, and of course apply grievous wounds. If possible though, you'll want to follow it after you do have a few W stacks to do that bonus damage. Your ultimate is Chain of Corruption and it does a lot of damage, applies Blight, and roots a target for 2 seconds, and can also spread. When activated, Varus flings out a tendril that infects the first enemy champion hit, dealing magic damage, rooting them for 2 seconds, and applying 3 stacks of Blight. The corruption then attempts to spread towards nearby enemy champions that stay near the infected target for 2 seconds, applying the same effects, then continue to spread until there are no further targets in range. This is a really strong ability because that 2-second root makes landing your Q and E insanely easy. It will apply 3 stacks of Blight as well, so you can use one ability, land some auto attacks, and then land a second ability and detonate it twice. In teamfights, if it spreads to multiple targets because they're CC'd and can't move, it will be incredibly devastating. Use this on clumped up enemies as much as you can so it is most effective. For your skill order, you first want to put a point in your ultimate whenever you can at 6, 11, and 16. Then for its long range poke damage, we want to max our Q ability, Piercing Arrow, first. We'll then want to max our E ability, Hail of Arrows, second, since it is really nice AoE damage, scales off your AD, and also does grievous wounds. Although our W ability, Blighted Quiver, does some nice percentage maximum health damage, we have to save it for last because it does scale off of our AP. If you're against a very tanky team, then you may want to consider maxing this one second, but generally, save it for last. For your pre-level 6 combo, you'll first want to get some auto attacks on the enemy champion, and stack some of your Blighted Quiver. When you hit 3 stacks, you can use either your E or Q ability to detonate them, and then follow up with the other ability you didn't already use. At this point, keep hitting the enemy with auto attacks, and when your Q or E ability come off cooldown, use them to detonate. For your combo with your ultimate, you'll first want to hit the enemy with your ultimate, Chain of Corruption. This will also apply 3 stacks of Blight, so you'll want to follow up with a charged Q ability. At this point, you'll want to start auto-attacking to get those 3 stacks of Blight on the enemy champion, and when they are there, you want to use your E ability to detonate them. You'll then want to start auto-attacking the enemy champion yet again to get those Blight stacks, and when your Q ability does come off cooldown, use it yet again to detonate and hopefully finish them off, getting you a pretty easy kill. Now let's look at a couple support synergies, and first up is Blitzcrank. He's a champion that if he can land his grab and pop somebody up, Varus can either use his E ability to slow them or his ultimate to snare them, and then follow up with all of his damage, getting a rather easy kill. There's of course some downsides in this lane, like the fact that there won't be any sustain whatsoever, but as long as he can land some grabs and pop some people up and provide his silence, it should be relatively easy. Next here we have Janna, and she's very defensive and works great with Varus because she can give him all the peeling he needs. Varus' weakness of having very low mobility is completely negated whenever he's partnered with a good Janna. She can then also toss her shield on Varus to increase his attack damage, which then in return also increases his poke damage. A good Janna will toss her shield on Varus whenever he's going for a piercing arrow, and if it does land, it's going to take a massive chunk of health out of the enemy. Next here we have Nautilus, and when you combine his crowd control with Varus' crowd control, you can get yourself some really damn easy kills. Whenever he lands his Q ability or his ultimate on the enemy champion, use your ultimate to combine with it and chain CC the target for a rather long duration. This will give you guys more than enough time to bring down a squishy champion, so as long as you land all your CCs, you're going to get yourself some rather easy kills. Next we have Vel'Koz, and him and Varus form the ultimate poke lane. If the enemy isn't able to consistently dodge your poke abilities, they're going to have a very rough time in the lane. Even if the enemy has a lot of sustain, this is one of those combos that's really hard to out-heal. Just sit there spamming your poke abilities, and when they're low enough, go for an all-in. In the lane phase, you'll want to focus on getting as much CS as possible while also poking the enemy with your piercing arrow. If possible, try to mix in auto attacks so you can get stacks of Blight from your Blighted Quiver, so your arrows will also deal percentage max health damage. If you're going for the lethality build, then make sure you back and get an early Tear of the Goddess so you can get it stacking. Once you're level 6 and you have your Yumu's Ghost Blade, you'll hit a massive power spike, so you'll want to look for some easy kills. Pull off your all-in with ultimate combo for maximum damage. Before a teamfight actually breaks out, you'll want to try to poke the enemy champions as much as you can with your piercing arrow so they start the upcoming fight missing some health. You can use your Chain of Corruption to either follow up on an initiation to make it even stronger, or if you do see a good opportunity, you can initiate your fight yourself. I'll usually only do this if my team is trying to engage or if I can get it on a high kill priority target. After your ultimate, you'll want to try and get some stacks of Blight from Blighted Quiver and proc the damage with either your piercing arrow or your hail of arrows on a high kill priority target. Now let's look at a couple hard matchups, and first up is Jhin. This is more of a skill matchup, but if he does have a support champion that can hit you over and over again and he can follow up and get you CC'd, you're usually in for a rough time. If this is what's happening in lane, then you'll have to make sure you dodge his W ability at all costs, because if he does land and he snares you, you're pretty much dead. Other than that, you pretty much just need to make sure you're not taking damage from his dancing grenades, and you poke him as much as you can. Next here we have Misfortune, and she's a very strong champion in the early and mid game, and you're going to have to avoid her bounced Q ability at all costs. If this lands and she's going for the lethality build, it can do half your health, no joke. That means pretty much you just want to keep an angle on her all the time and make sure the bouncing shot cannot hit you, and then poke her as much as you can, just like every other matchup I'm going to mention. Last here I have Ziggs, and you may have really strong poke, but Ziggs is the king of poke. Against Ziggs, you really have to focus on dodging his Q ability, because if it's consistently landing, you're definitely going to lose the lane phase. This lane is usually pretty simple in the fact that whoever's landing the most poke is usually going to win that lane phase. Keep in mind when you are charging your Q, you do lose movement speed, so you have to be very careful because his Q is going to be a lot easier to land at the same time. With all of that covered, let's get into our item build, which starts with a Doran's Blade, Health Potion, and a Wording Totem. For your first buys, if you're going for the lethality core, then you'll want to get a Tear the Goddess, and if you're going for the crit core, you'll want to get the BF Sword. The lethality build is definitely the most popular one right now, and it's really strong in the early and mid game, but the crit core is definitely much better in the late game. Both are very viable, and it's up to you to choose which one you want to go for. But anyways, for that lethality core, we have the Yumu's, the Edge of Night, and the Manamune. The Yumu's will give you a really good early power spike, and the Edge of Night has that defensive shield, making you a lot harder to bring down. Then of course the Manamune's in there as well, because it will help with your mana issues, and of course it does provide some increased damage as well. For the crit core, we go for the Essence Reaver, the Runaan's, and an Infinity Edge. This will solve your mana problems right off the bat with the Essence Reaver, give you 70% crit, increased crit damage, and some nice attack speed as well. It's a very, very strong build, but as I said before, it kicks in way later. For your boot options, you have the Berserker Greaves for its attack speed, or the Ionian Boots for its 10% CDR. Both are very viable. For our item pool, we first have the Duskblade, which gives more lethality and also scales off of how much lethality you have already with its bonus attack when you are unseen. If you instead want a percentage armor penetration item, you could get the LDR or the Mortal Reminder. I prefer the LDR here, but the Mortal Reminder is really strong if you do need grievous wounds. Sure, you do have it on your E ability already, but it's not always that reliable. If you're against a big AP assassin, then you could always get the Maw as well, because that can help you survive their burst. Then finishing off our item pool, we have all of our lifesteal options in the Death's Dance, the Mercurial Scimitar, and the Bloodthirster. Death's Dance is really solid because of its bleed and 10% CDR, Mercurial Scimitar is really good against high CC teams, and the Bloodthirster is great if you just want flat damage with a shield. For our lethality full build, we take the core, get Ionian Boots, and then that Duskblade, and a Death's Dance. If the game went really long with this build and people started having a lot of armor, then I would replace that Yumu's later on with something like an LDR just to get through more armor. The strength of this build is not in the late game though, usually you'll want to try to end it pretty early on. For our crit full build, we take that core, then get an LDR, and a Bloodthirster. We'll have a lot more late game damage because of the crit from this build, and of course we do also have that LDR to get through the armor as well. And that, ladies and gentlemen, covers everything I've got for Season 7 AD Carry Varus. Don't forget to check out the video description below for a link to all my social medias, and keep in mind that I do Riot Point giveaways on my Twitter, and I do also have a Discord server, so those are two you should definitely check out. But other than that, thank you guys a ton for watching the guide, I hope you guys did enjoy it, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.